Hello, welcome to this episode of Rich Insights. I'm Don Rich, Head of Investments for Esoteric Capital Markets. Today's topic is on the U.S.-China political risk, right? The escalating political risk. Now, this political risk has taken a huge move up here last week. In fact, Stephen Roach, the former chairman of Morgan Stanley Asia, and a highly decorated academic at Yale University, he described tensions today between the U.S. and China as being at the highest in 25 years. The highest in 25 years. He describes it as a Cold War. Right, that's some pretty strong language. I think we have to treat this as a potential tail risk. And not only that, we have to move this thing up to the top of the list of tail risk concerns. All right, I'd move it right to the top because it appears that the Trump administration is going to use China as a central focus of the re-election campaign. All right, so that means 6 months of nonstop issues on China. So we talked about some of the other tail risks in the past. Let's run through them here real quick. We talked about emerging markets, right? The potential for an emerging market crisis. And the basis for that was quite simple, right? Intuitive. The idea is if you have a crisis in the commodity markets, right? Negative $40 oil, for instance, how can that not spill over until and result in a crisis in the commodity-based economies? All right, so the risk of an EM crisis seems non-trivial. All right, it's a tail risk, the second one. The third one had to do with the commercial mortgage market, right? We have this huge spike in missed payments by business owners, by retail shops, and by apartment holders, right? The renters. They're missing payments, and so it's hard, again, not to see a spillover effect into the commercial mortgage market. So we have these three risks. Political risk between the U.S. and China, the EM potential crisis there in the emerging market, in the commercial market things. Now, it's hard to see how at least one of these three do not come to fruition within the next 6 months, and possibly all of them. So as I always say, there's a time to play offense when you're investing, and there's a time to play defense. And to me right now, there's way too many storm clouds on the horizon to think about playing offense, right? This is an environment where you play defense. Okay, so let's get to today's topic now, the escalating political risk. What are the key topics on this? And we're going to have more than one segment, by the way, on this. We're going to have more than one segment. I'll discuss it as we get through. So what's going on right now is the U.S. and China are antagonizing each other. All right, antagonizing each other. So the U.S. has recently raised 4 concerns. Let's run through these quickly. Trade and tariff concerns. You say, "Oh shit! I'm sick of this. I've heard trade and tariff concerns nonstop for 2 years. I thought this was resolved." Well, yes and no. So the agreement originally called for $200 billion in new spending on the part of China. Right, $200 billion in incremental spending. And then the decision was made to break that up in a series of phases. Now, first, phase 1, I believe, was for $75 or $80 billion. Right? And then the coronavirus hit. Right? The coronavirus hit. The worst economic downturn in history. And it wasn't just in the U.S., right? Globally, it was the worst in history. It surpassed 2008 levels, and a lot of the numbers are already surpassing the Great Depression of 1929 levels. All right, so when we say the worst in history, that's no small statement there. So China was tentatively committed to this phase 1 agreement, and then the coronavirus came along. And China's response was, well, we can no longer adhere to the timetable we agreed to. The Trump administration says, no, we had an agreement in place, and if you don't follow through, we're going to raise tariffs, all right? So we're going to see a lot more of the threatening of increasing the tariffs in the very near future here. What else is going on here? Concern over the corporate governance structures. All right. What we're talking about here is, can you rely on the accounting numbers, on the accounting information from some of these other markets? All right. So this is really a quality control issue, right? The accounting, the legal, the regulatory environments, they differ from country to country. That shouldn't come as a shock to anyone, right? But most developed markets have a fairly consistent framework, a fairly consistent Western infrastructure that everybody uses. That's not true in EM. That's not true in EM. So what's different this time? This isn't only a concern that the president's raising, but now the Senate, right, the Republican-controlled Senate, has also been talking about possibly delisting firms that don't adhere to the Western infrastructure. Right, that's a strong statement there. Right. So that's what we're talking about, the corporate governance issues. The handling of the coronavirus. What's going on here? Well, again, the virus outbreak seems, at least seems to me, seems everything I've read, it's indisputable. The outbreak was in a province of China, right? But whether or not it's fair to blame China for the virus outbreak, that's another entire issue. Now, on top of that, the other things that are being raised today is perhaps there will be a formal investigation, right? A global formal investigation into the outbreak of the virus. And if that's the case, the president has hinted that could potentially be embarrassing to China. All right. So that's a new issue on the table today. That. Now, Huawei's been in the news, right? Been in the news back in late 2018. You remember the CFO of Huawei was arrested. Arrested in Vancouver, Canada. All right. We'll talk more about that later. But what's new about Huawei today is Huawei has recently been put on this restricted list, right? This restricted list. And this restricted list then restricts the access that foreign companies would have to U.S. semiconductor components. All right, so Huawei being a telecom company, right? They essentially think of them as an AT&T, a Verizon, T-Mobile. Those would be their U.S. counterparts. If they're restricted to U.S. semiconductors, that puts a huge wrinkle in their business plan, right? It's very hard to continue operating that way. All right, but again, there's many facets to this Huawei story, and we're going to talk about those in detail tomorrow. Okay, so what's China's response been to all this? The first thing was in terms of weakening their currency. All right, so on Friday, the currency weakened significantly. I don't know, maybe that's too strong a word, right? So China has a pegged exchange rate. All right, it's highly regulated, it's controlled, it trades within a tight band. Right? And you never know, it's still within the band, so you never know whether it's market forces or politics going on here. But it was suspicious, it was a rather big move, and it weakened on Friday, right? And the reason for that is that everybody wants to weaken their currency right now. Everybody wants to weaken their currency because it serves as a form of a stimulus plan, right? It promotes your exports. So it's like another stimulus program to try to get past the coronavirus as quickly as possible. And so there were allegations, let's use that word, there were allegations that China was just letting the world know that they could weaken their currency at any time, very quickly, if they chose to. And again, it would be good for them, but it would be bad for a lot of other players, particularly the U.S. All right, so that was the first thing. The second thing was they proposed national security laws for Hong Kong. Proposed national security laws. All right, what we're talking about here is these security laws would expand the authoritarian framework of mainland China. So today they have what's called a one country, two system framework, where the political and economic rules for Hong Kong are different than they are for mainland. So it's still one country, but two different sets of rules. All right. So they're talking about one country, two systems to one country, one system. That would be huge. That would be huge. Because you have to remember, Hong Kong is one of the financial centers of the world. All right. That would be huge. Now, in addition to that, there's also contradictory incentives right now. Right? The Trump administration wants to accelerate all these topics as quickly as they can. Right? Because they have 6 months. May not have another full year. They may not. China, on the other hand, of course, wants to slow walk this thing. They want to drag their feet and draw this out as long as possible. So this event is guaranteed to be in the news here, nonstop. And it's going to be swaying markets. It's going to be swaying markets. You got to get used to it. Get familiar with these topics, folks. All right, so that's our topic for today. I'm Don Rich. You've just experienced a rich insight. I hope you've enjoyed it. May your beer be colder than the company you keep. We'll talk again soon. Thank you.